Welcome to the Mike Litton Experience podcast. Mike has over 31 years experience in real estate, finance, and investing. He's passionate about being a father, a teacher, a realtor, an investor, and a leader. Everyone has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. And now, introducing the host of the Mike Litton Experience, Mike Litton.
So what can you expect from the Mike Litton Experience? You can expect stories that will inspire, motivate, advice that will sharpen your focus, and expert information on real estate, finance, and market conditions. Les Leopold, thank you so much for being our guest on the Mike Litton Experience. I'm super excited for our time together. And like we talked about before we hit record, everybody has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. So with your permission, we're going to start with where you were born, go all the way up to today, and then we want to talk about this book that you wrote called War on Workers. And it's basically about how these mass layoffs and greed have really destroyed a lot of our workforce. And I'm really super excited to have you on here. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. Really look forward to it.
So where were you born?
I was born on a chicken farm in South Jersey, Vineland, New Jersey, which many people say is south of the Mason-Dixon line. South Jersey is very southern. It's a different kind of place.
Did you say Vineland?
It would Vineland, Vineland.
Okay.
Vineland.
Okay.
It's about
never heard of it before.
It's halfway between Atlantic City and Philadelphia.
Gotcha.
It's really in the middle of nowhere.
I got you.
But it's a large. It was the largest town in terms of area in New Jersey, but it's a small population. Anyway, there were five. My parents were refugees from Germany, Nazi Germany, and they kind of got a start in this country first in New York City, and then they moved to South Jersey, along with many other immigrants who started these chicken farms, which did pretty well during World War II, and then again during the Korean War. And that's where I grew up. I grew up as a kid on a farm with lots of space and dogs, cats, and a few friends. I had a sister who was 8 years older, who was really my guide because she was like a full-blooded American, didn't have an accent, guided me through how to be an American kid. Then my parents sold the farm and moved to North Jersey. And that was a completely different experience. They had to work very hard. My dad learned how to repair radios and TVs at that time. My mom was a bookkeeper. We lived in a very small garden apartment, no more dogs, no more cats, new environment. And then we moved to this suburban town called Fairlawn, New Jersey, where I went to junior high school and high school. And my experience was that of a sort of an outsider, sort of 1 foot in, 1 foot out. As being a first generation person, you're sort of not quite part of the American society, but you're not outside of it either. You don't have an accent, etc. The pressure on me as a kid, however, was to succeed. My parents, were sacrificing right and left so I could go to a good school. And there was huge pressure on me. And if I didn't succeed, I would be in trouble. Not that they would be angry at me, but they would be heartbroken, really, what it came down to. And it led me to become kind of a grade grubber. More than the content of knowledge, it was I got to get a good grade because I got to go to a good school. And that became sort of my modus operandi. I went to Oberlin College, then I went to grad school at Princeton, but I was always kind of alienated from academic work. And I realized somewhere along the line, towards the end of that a lot of my friends were going to be academics. That wasn't me. and I realized I was going to be a translator,
Mhm.
that I liked what the academics produced, but I thought that maybe my role could be more of an educator of non-academics,
Okay.
this sort of in between. That kind of fit my status, an outsider to academic, but also an outsider to the working class, because
Mhm.
I wasn't going to go work in a factory. That would have been an insult to my parents.
Right.
So I was looking for some way to do both, and I came up. The person that a couple of people helped me do this. The key person was a guy, in terms of the spirit of it, was a guy named Tony Mazzocchi, who
Mhm.
was a labor leader, very radical labor leader, but of the oil, chemical, and atomic workers. And he came from New York. He actually knew my sister. That's how I met him. And he asked me to design a economics course for workers. This was during summer of 1974.
Mhm.
The economy was falling apart. He thought working people need to understand more about how the economy worked. And he sort of picked up that I had some of these translator skills. I'd worked in some political campaigns. I was attentive to, uh, I was not an ideologue where I would turn people off because I would say all these radical things. I was sensitive to people like my parents,
Mhm.
working class people. So then I ran into this other guy in the process named David Gordon, who passed away young, unfortunately. He was a super economist, Harvard grad, uh, professor at the New School in New York. And he and I started this thing called the Labor Institute in 1975. I've been there ever since. My
Wow.
entire adult life, working life, we're going into our 50th year. Now, there's too many stories to tell about what the growth experiences were up and down, but I will tell you uh, that because I learned something important, because I wasn't an academic, because I needed to explain what academics do. I
Mhm.
learned uh, that you needed a good teaching methodology for adults, that it was a mistake to get up and try to lecture, tell
Mhm.
people adults have opinions. So we developed this very participatory educational model, and then we deepened it by visiting how they did it with the trade union movement in England, actually.
Mhm.
But we developed it to such a point where we could train workers to become their own trainers using a non-lecture small group approach,
Mhm.
where people would do problem solving, look at materials, do problem solving, bring in their own experience. It was a bringing together their experience, the academic knowledge together,
Mhm.
and without them saying you're wrong and this is right.
Mhm.
Let people come to their own conclusions in these small groups. It worked very well.
Yeah.
It put us on the map. We got jobs, contracts with trade union movement and other groups we got government grants and we got private grants to help us uh, develop this. But something interesting happened along the way.
Mhm.
Uh, it was grueling work in that I spent a lot of time fundraising. I spent a lot of time organizing our staff. At one point, we had like 12 full-time people, and uh, you put 12 people together, there's going to be personality clashes and problems. So I was kind of uh, uh, out there administering and organizing and not having much time for reflection.
Right.
I was starting to burn out. So a funny thing happened. You talk about changing experiences. What changed? And we used to summer. My wife and I and our two kids uh, at this lake in Montana, in the Beartooth Absaroka Wilderness. And the cabin we rented, the people who owned it lived on a river right outside of Yellowstone Park.
Mhm.
And we went to visit them. And the father uh, had just retired from the Alaska uh, Health Service, where he was a doctor of Native Americans, basically.
Hmm.
And I asked him what he thought about his job, and he said he loved it. When he said that, it was like a stab in my chest.
Hmm.
I he loved it. I couldn't say that about my job.
Hmm.
I realized I couldn't say that. And what I connected with is my dad never liked his work, never liked his job, always felt uh, uh, spiritually harmed by it, is the best way I put it. He just didn't, unsatisfied. And I could feel that. And I said, I don't want my kids to feel that.
Mhm.
So I said to myself right then, if in 5 years I can't say I love my job, I'm leaving, even
Mhm.
though I set this whole thing up and we've been running for 30 years, et cetera, et cetera. So that was just by talking to somebody. And this is where I respect what you're doing. Sometimes just one conversation can kick something. Yeah, I mean, you're ready for it, but
Mhm.
something just crystallizes where you're at. And it was a little depressing, of course, to realize he loved his job and I didn't. That
Mhm.
was like something I hadn't faced up to. Well, a few years later, within this 5-year period, I was going to stick to this. My mentor gets pancreatic cancer and dies. He was in his mid 70s. In the last year of his life, he lived. It took a while. He didn't die like in a month. It took like a year.
Mhm.
Uh, I interviewed him about his whole life, and I just turned on a tape recorder. I'm a terrible interviewer. I mean, you would have done much better. I'm not professional, but we covered a lot of ground. I had tape after tape after tape. He used to say to me, "You already asked me that question. Why are you doing that again?" But
Mhm.
we went through everything in his life, and then he died, and I realized I'm going to write his story. I thought a bunch of us who were close to him were going to work together, but they all faded away. They didn't want to touch it. They were too distraught, etc.
Mm.
And I started working on this book,
Mhm.
my first book. Uh, and it was the most amazing experience I ever had up until that point. The book dragged me along. It wrote itself. People say, "Oh, I have trouble writing. I can't." I said, "Oh no, this was like I was still working at where I was supposed to work, but I
Mhm.
basically stayed home, and
Mhm.
I would help. I get the kids to school, and I'm supposed to pick them up at 3 o'clock or 3:30 to take them to wherever they're supposed to go next. And sometimes they'd be just standing there waiting for me because I was so lost in the book
Mhm.
that I forgot what time it was.
Yeah.
So this time from 8:30 to 3 o'clock would just whiz by,
Mhm.
and I just loved working on it. I got the transcripts of all the tapes and found this stuff, and I realized I misunderstood what he said. It was only when I started typing in his quote that I realized, oh, that's what he meant. And
Mhm.
I had all these ideas for chapters, and it became an out of body experience.
Wow.
First of all, that burned out feeling that I had before being an administrator dissipated. It was
Hmm.
gone. All of a sudden, I was in love with my work.
Mhm.
I was, was I going to be a bestseller type author? I doubt it. That's not just about how good you are as a writer; it's how connected you are, and how ambitious you are in pushing your stuff. But anyway, I got a publisher, and book called "The Man Who Hated Work and Loved Labor."
Mhm.
Uh, the Life and Times of Tony Masaki, and it was just great to do. And I think people have enjoyed the book. It's still out there. People are still using it, and I realized I want to write books. That there's something about the book writing process that's uh, it's it's long enough that you can really immerse yourself in it and uh, dive in deeply and see where it goes. Not like a short essay, not like a fundraising proposal. It's like something different.
Mhm.
And rather than being frightening, it's like, I can't wait to do this again.
Mhm.
So I just finished my sixth book. My eye is always open, six, yeah. Uh, and this is this is the other, I neglected to say this because it's almost embarrassing. My sister is became a professional writer, journalist.
Mhm.
She retired as the UN bureau chief for Reuters News Service. She
Oh,
was the
wow.
Africa News Service
Mhm.
bureau chief. A real pro. I mean, a
Mhm.
real writer. And my mother, actually, even though English was not her first language, is also a very good writer. I was terrible. I couldn't spell. I'm kind of dyslexic, so I don't even see. I have to have a proofreader because I miss words. A word will be missing or totally misspelled, and I can't see it. I'll
Right.
read it and I'll put the word back in even though it's not there. I just have a problem. I've had it ever since I was a little kid. And so writing was the last thing I would do.
Mhm.
I hated it. So the idea that I'm writing books now is like a 360 from anything you could imagine. My sister, yes. Me, never. So
Right.
I was good with math, supposedly. I was good with numbers, but I was terrible with words. So, but it doesn't matter now because I have editors that I work with on my staff that catch the garbage. But I've got ideas, I've got spirit, I've got what people call a voice. Uh,
Mhm.
and I'm not saying it's perfect. I can make mistakes. I can maybe my ideas aren't as good as they could be, but the process is absolutely invigorating to me. Now I have a Substack as well. So I get to write shorter pieces, and that's fun. But it's interesting. It's a little bit like a little sugar high. You
Mhm.
write something, you get it out there, people read it, comment on it, and then it's done. And then you
Mhm.
got to write it again. A book, it's going to take 9 months, a year of you working on it. Then you go through this other process of other people reading it and giving your comments. And then the editors come in. Then you have to find the publisher and they come in. It's a whole process and it takes a long time. And then
Mhm.
there's selling the book where you have to go on podcasts and radio shows, et cetera, and try to get
Mhm.
reviews. Uh, that's not so much fun. But the fun is writing the book and getting and polishing it, making it better and better and better. And little articles are fun, but they 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 disappear too quickly. The book stays out there. I don't know if it makes. I mean, the problem with my avocation, it now works for me. I'm making a contribution to the world. I'm helping to make the world a little bit better. At best, I could say I'm tossing a pebble into the pond.
Mhm.
It makes a ripple, but until millions of other people toss pebbles in the pond, you're not going to notice it. It's not going to really change the world. But I've got a few ideas now I'm working on that may have a little bit more impact that grew out of this book, actually. Anyway, that's kind of the outlines of my stories. Look, there are many bumps and bruises along the way. I would warn anybody when you set up, we have this small nonprofit called the Labor Institute. Uh, it's a challenge. It's a challenge both in terms of raising money. It's a challenge also. Inevitably, there are personnel issues that come up. You try not to work in hierarchical fashion. You try to work in a collective fashion. That's difficult to do. None of this comes easy.
Mhm.
But if you can find the thing that turns you on, which it took me 35 years to find. I was 60 years old before I started writing books. Uh, I feel so lucky, uh, both for me and for my kids and for my spouse, that I found something that I really enjoy
Mhm.
because I'm sure it's made their lives a lot better. I'm carrying a lot less of a cloud on my head about not liking my work. I like this. Do I like the managing part of our nonprofit? Not so much, but I've got other people now who are taking that over. Uh, and I'm looking for people to take over more of that kind of work so I can just concentrate on the writing and the idea piece. Anyway, I feel very, very lucky. Had you talked to me, 20 years ago,
Mhm.
you would have gotten a different story.
Mhm.
You would have gotten a story about someone who's uh, created some things, good things about education, the small group activity method and such, but you would have picked up this sense of it's not quite satisfying. It's
Mhm.
the guy's on a burnout path, and fortunately, that I got off that path. I suggest that everybody talk to somebody from the Alaskan Health Service at some point because they seem to like their work. Uh, anyway, I think it's important for people to try to find a way to enjoy their work. It's
Mhm.
hard because there's so many constraints, especially if you're in the private sector, even in the public sector. It's hard if you're in a hierarchical organization to get the space. But it's great when it can happen, and I admire those people that have made it happen. I really respect those people that try to make it happen. So I hope you can join that club.
Well, I love what I do. And I know you can't tell because I hide it well, but I absolutely love what I do.
Oh no,
But
you show it very much.
I'm not sure I could love it more, to be honest with you. But it's fun because we're having an impact, right? And it's exactly what we set out to do. We set out to help people tell their stories. And what's amazing is, we've done over, like I mentioned to you before, we've done over 250 interviews. And I've had so many people, I mean, well over 200, say to me, nobody ever asked me about my life story, Mike. Nobody ever asked me the questions that you're asking. What's fascinating to me is when you start piecing these together, when you start looking at the sort of the breadth of the work that we've done so far, and we've only been doing this 16 months, but you look at the breadth of what we've done so far, and there's a common thread, and it runs through all of the stories. It doesn't matter. So the world told them no, and they turned it into a yes. And some of them, the world told them no many, 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 many times, right? And they turned around and figured out a way to turn it into a yes. You were moved by a passion that you had for this person who you got together with and chronicled his life, and then turned that into a book. And you found something because you were passionate about passing that story on and passionate about that's why we do what we do, because his life story has meaning. His life story has wisdom. His life story is something people can read because you wrote it and you took the time to sit with him and record all that, right? Because you had the passion to do that, now people can read that book and they can literally learn from his mistakes. They can learn from what he's done that he would, if he had it to do over again, might do it differently, right? That's what this is about. That's what I think is the juice of life. I think the juice of life is what we can do, you and me and everybody, to pay it forward. If you look at your life, there are people in your life that have stopped when they didn't have time, and they probably, they just did it because it was the right thing to do. And they said to you, okay, young man, you're going this way. You need to go this way. Right? We owe it to those people. Some of them have passed. We owe it to those people, I believe, to continue that legacy, to continue paying it forward. That first book you wrote and all these books that you're writing is you paying it forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Well, that's the brilliance of what
the-
you're doing. And I think the reason why you love it so much is because it's a major, you've never shrunk from large projects. You've never shrunk from thinking big, right? These are large projects. When you write a book, it's a large project. I think you love rolling your sleeves up and getting in there and getting it done because of the effect that you know that it'll have on mankind. It's your legacy.
Well, it's interesting. I would like to think that's why I do it, but actually, it's also because it's so much fun for me.
Yeah.
I think the same for you. I mean, yes, you're making this wonderful contribution, but it's actually joyous.
Yeah.
I remember I was this guy from the Wharton School of Business that I was on an advisory board with. He just told me how much he hated writing. He says, I do it, but I hate it. Da, 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 da. And I'm saying, I love it. I said, I just love it. I mean, I'm not writing for an academic journal. I'm writing for the public. It's different.
Mm-hmm.
But there's another part of the story that's almost harder to talk about, which is, for me, finding this path was almost part of a life and death struggle, which was the pressure on me to succeed was so great that I almost didn't make it. I almost failed. And to the point where I would have been self-destructive. I mean, I was that depressed at various points during high school and junior high school, college. It took a long time for me to master that, and then once I got that stabilized, then became the next thing was okay, and I'm working, I'm functioning, earning a living, et cetera, et cetera. Now, and I'm trying to make a contribution. Now, how do I grow to love making the contribution? So I had to go through a couple of steps before that's why I took till I was 60. I had to really be sure I had both feet on the ground, that emotionally I could handle it, because when you write and when you do interviews like you're doing, you also have to be prepared to take a hit. Not everybody agrees with everything you write about. Even my good friends who are editors, it's amazing what comes back. I mean, I had some of my colleagues spent a lot of time writing questions and making comments, and you have to sort of have you have to be able to handle that without going, oh my God, I'm failing, and that part of you has to be put behind. So I think you're right to say that that you want to make the contribution, but the contribution is so much more meaningful if you actually love the work as you're doing it. And it's scary to say this on the air, but that passion it's more than just my political commitment. It's also that I love doing it, and that's what keeps feeding it, keeps why you can do 253 interviews. If you didn't like it, I mean, you would have stopped after a few. You'd say, "Well, this is fun, but not for me."
Yeah. Well, 98% of
what's for
podcasts.
me,
98% of podcasts don't make it past episode 2.
poof,
And that was
they
never,
disappear.
that when I read that statistic, it rocked my world. You know what I mean? Because this is something I always knew I would do. And it's something I always knew that I wanted to do and I was passionate about. And I just had put it off for too long. And so finally it was just like, okay, I'm doing this. That's all there is to it. And so I figured it out. We're still figuring it out, right? But it's been an amazing journey, really a lot of fun. And the people I've met, oh my goodness.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. And
it's the juice of life, Les. It's I don't know how to explain it, but it's like striking gold. All the people I've met and all the things I've heard and all the stories. I mean, it's amazing.
When I started working on writing the book, actually after the interviews were hard, the guy's dying, it's like sad. But when I started writing it, it was like what you just said, it was gold. I realized this was absolutely precious that I was working on. And I was like, it was in my hands. Now my job was to make a good piece of work out of this gold, but I felt so positive. The hard part of this kind of conversation is, what's the trigger for others who aren't us? Right? Where do they find that moment to build their lives on a track that really is going to be satisfying?
And that's precisely why we do what we do.
Right.
Because we're reaching people. Every single episode, we're reaching people, right? And we're inspiring them to go and do things they've been putting off. And that's what we're all about.
Well, see, that's if you could bottle that and share it, that would be spectacular. See, in my case, again, going back to early history, my parents did not really want to be chicken farmers, right? That they were, in a sense, forced by their immigration to do this. So they were not happy campers. They were living for me and my sister more than they were living for themselves. So that lack of satisfaction was something I knew what that was like. I didn't want to go there. I was going to do everything possible to not go there, but the process of not going there was hard. It wasn't like, several things opened up to me. I got involved in political campaigns against the Vietnam War. And in the process, I met what turned out to be a lot of famous people. Bill Clinton and I were in the same campaign. And I made a decision not to go in their direction. That was a very hard choice, to not become kind of a political operative.
We hope you enjoyed another episode of the Mike Litton Experience. If you did, do us a favor, smash that subscribe button, tell your friends, family, and coworkers about our program, and wherever you get your podcasts, please leave us a rating. It helps us to connect with quality people just like you.
And that's a wrap. Another episode of the Mike Litton Experience in the books. Reach out to Mike on Instagram at Litton Realty. Want to meet with Mike? Check out calendly.com/Rio760.